and welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. The Future is Spoken has a special episode for listeners. It is with Ananya Sharan, who led the team to build a voice assistant at Pandora. She takes us through the collaborative process and how Pandora subscribers contributed to the process of developing a voice assistant. This is a fascinating episode that gives listeners an inside look into one of the biggest and most successful voice tech projects. Enjoy! Hello, Ananya. Welcome to The Future is Spoken.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Great. It's our pleasure. I know that you're a search and voice expert and you're currently working with Pandora. Can you tell us about yourself and your background, please?
Sure. So I am currently at Pandora and I am the PM for Voice Mode, which is Pandora's native voice assistant within the app that lets you discover and listen to music in a frictionless, effort-free way. And prior to Pandora, I have been a product manager for several years, mainly focused on search and discovery experiences. And that's my area of interest. Prior to being a product manager, I was a software engineer. I did that for a few years and then went to business school to become a banker, but realized that technology and product management was where my heart lay. So that's what I've been doing for the past several years. And of late, just really happy to be working on this cool new innovation called Voice Mode and brought it to market. And now I'm watching it grow and be used by more and more people and setting the vision and roadmap for it.
That's great. Very exciting. And as we mentioned before we began our interview, Ananya, there'll be a lot of people outside the US listening to this podcast. So for that market segment that doesn't have Pandora or might not even be familiar with it, could you tell us what Pandora is?
Pandora is US's largest audio streaming platform. It came onto the market as internet radio, one of the first ones out there. And what Pandora does really well is personalized recommendations. It's known for its music genome project, which is essentially annotating every track in our catalog. Music experts listen to it and characterize it and give it attributes on multiple dimensions. And that's what our data science leverages to understand what to play next, what music to recommend you, and understand your likes and dislikes. So that's what Pandora is known for delivering personalized audio content tuned to your every moment in life.
Wow, that sounds really, really great, Ananya. I mean, I can't really compare it to Spotify because I do live in Canada and I use Spotify. I get recommendations from Spotify and sometimes they're spot on and sometimes they're way out in left field. And I think, well, why are they suggesting that? But and I'm curious too, does Pandora recommend or does it carry podcasts as well?
Yes, Pandora has music and podcasts. So a great source for all personalized audio recommendations, whether it's spoken word or music.
Oh, great. Now, you worked on a really exciting project in the last few years, and it's Pandora's Voice Mode. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Tell us about that. Why did Pandora decide that it was time to have voice mode, or was it an employee suggestion? Where did the initiative come from before we jump into how you worked on it and how the project went?
So it was a result of internal employee ideas as well as what the market was telling us. So smart speaker adoption has seen tremendous growth in the last few years in the US and around the world. And millions of people were already listening to Pandora on these connected speakers. So on Google Home and Alexa, people hooked up their Pandora accounts and were talking to their smart speakers to listen to music. Music streaming is one of the top use cases of smart speakers and other connected devices that are voice controlled. So we recognize the opportunity, but we also recognize that on these connected devices and smart speakers, Pandora cannot really leverage its wealth of data science and knowledge about the listener's personal tastes to deliver personalized music that is tailored to the unique tastes of each listener. So that is something that we were limited in doing while delivering a voice enabled experience on smart devices. So we really wanted to build something in house and showcase our data science, our deep knowledge about the listener, and all of the intelligence we have in our recommendation ensembles to bring that natural conversational way of consuming music and podcasts and put it right on your phone. So we really were thinking with our customer in mind and what they were already doing in this space, but what we could do for them in a better and differentiated way. And that was the motivation behind bringing voice mode to market.
That's pretty exciting. It's always great when something is employee driven as well. I always like that.
Yeah.
Now, just so listeners are clear, is it correct that you couldn't, for example, use your Google or Amazon or Apple voice assistant within your home and say, oh, Pandora, play me Beethoven's Fifth? Could you still do that before you had voice mode?
You could. So you would have to say, hey, Google, play me Beethoven's Fifth on Pandora. Sometimes you had to specify. Sometimes if you already set it up as your default music provider, you didn't have to specify. However, it was Google deciding what to play from our catalog. So if you're looking for something really specific, a particular song or an album, it's more likely to get that right. Everyone will get that right because it means one particular thing you want to listen to. But voice is suited for more ambiguous situations where you don't know exactly what you want. You're in a certain mood, or you want to start doing something and you need it for that hands-free control. And you say, okay, just play me something for cooking or play me something for driving. And that's where these connected devices couldn't deliver the personalized recommendation of what to play. But on the phone, when you say, hey, Pandora, play me something for cooking, we know what you like to listen to. We know that you like Italian cooking radio or Latino Spanish, Latino cooking music. So we play something like that instead of just picking a random playlist or a station that you may or may not like.
Okay, I understand. And I've noticed a few times you have referred to phones. So Pandora's voice mode works specifically with phone.
Yes, it is. It is a mobile-only feature right now, and it's available on iOS and Android.
I understand. So with one's iPhone or Android phone, one can communicate directly with Pandora as opposed to the phone's assistant.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
and you can tap into Pandora directly and ask for a piece of music or a podcast. And as you explained earlier, its algorithm will, provide you with recommended listens. If, going to your example, you say, hey, Pandora, play me some music that I can cook by, or, play me something to relax. I've had a busy day, whatever. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So you were the leader on this project, the project lead. Is that correct, Ananya? Yeah.
I am the product manager on it. Yes.
Okay. Tell us about the project as well as your involvement with it. Now, we're at the stage where Pandora has made a decision. They're going to work on voice mode for all Pandora users. What happened next?
So with any product development life cycle, there's several stages. And the first phase is figuring out what to build and why to build it, which we'd already done. And the next stage is how to build it. So to build a voice assistant, there are several core components of the technology, one of which is automatic speech recognition. So anything you say, converting the audio to a text transcript is the first thing that happens when a conversation is initiated between a user and a voice assistant. So for that piece of the technology, we made a decision to use an outside vendor because there's a lot of companies that specialize in automatic speech recognition, and us being an audio streaming provider, we wanted to see what solutions we could source from the market. So we went with an outside vendor for the automatic speech recognition, and then building kind of the very top layer of the natural language understanding as well. So just to extract the intent from what the user has said, we're using a third party for. But everything that happens after that, the deep natural language understanding, figuring out what to play next based on the user's intent. And this is all engineering, science, UX research, design. Like I, as a product manager, advocate for the user's needs and how they might be using the technology and what's important to them in the experience. And my engineering partner will determine, okay, if these are the experiences that we want in the product, how do we go about building them so it's fast, it's reliable, it's scalable? And my science partners do all of this intelligence on what does the user mean when they say, I'm in a happy mood, or I feel like chilling. What do they want to listen to? How do we know that they're not asking for a song called chilling? So things like that is what I work with our data scientists for. And then UX research for an innovative project like this is also super important because we're building a lot of things that don't have well established industry standards or are still in the early phases of adoption. So there's no ground rules of how to build them. So we really need to think ahead of what the user might want out of this experience day in and day out, 6 months down the line, how they see it progressing. So I work very closely with my research team as well to survey actual users, get them to play with a prototype of the product, get their thoughts and feedback on what was going well, what was not going so well. And of course, designers are key to defining what the experience looks and feels like within the app, what education looks like, what the onboarding looks like. So all of those things, definitely a team effort. And I'm here to represent the work of many, many people who went at it for months and years before we got into the market. So a lot of smart people thinking about how to solve the problem. And I would have to include our employees as well. Before bringing this product out to our actual users, we tested heavily internally as well, made sure all the Pandora employees were whitelisted to test this out and give their feedback, because that is so, so important to set that benchmark of quality and get that crucial feedback before we feel that we're ready to put it in front of real listeners. Same with a technology like this, you have one chance to get it right. And if the user doesn't have the most delightful experience the first time around, then they're much less likely to come back and be a repeat user and advocate for it. So
really, it's this massive, sorry to interrupt, it's this massive multifunctional team that you have involved. You've got engineering, you've got science, you've got UX, researchers who I would imagine are liaisoning directly with Pandora
with the users. That's right.
And then you're managing this team. So let's step back a little bit and tell us from a personal point of view, what was it like managing such a big project? And, you know, especially in light of the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, there's no industry standard and nothing quite like what you've done before. So it's like you're not just developing something new, you're a pioneer, which is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
So what was it like for you personally? I mean, you must have had a fair bit of pressure as well as being excited about what you were doing.
For sure. When I joined Pandora, I was not very familiar with voice technologies. And so I had to do a lot of learning and coming up to speed myself in the early days, where I was trying to learn about the UX implications of having a voice interface within the app. So a lot of steep learning curve for me as well. But in terms of working with the team, I was managing their efforts, not so much managing them directly. But yes, for an innovative product like this, there's a lot of internal advocacy that has to be done as well, because people are not super familiar with it. They might not understand why it's important to build, why it's important to look outside the established norms of how projects are typically delivered, and build a case for that internally as well. And I'd say that was one of the challenges with this project is we couldn't be purely timeline driven, because it's natural language technologies, it's learning models, it's accent recognition, and all of these AI models take time to train. And so it's hard to predict with absolute certainty when the product is going to be ready, or when it's going to achieve, let's say, 90% accuracy.
So,
So
did you have to do the internal advocacy as well? And did you have, for example, communications people to help you with that, or team members to help you with the advocacy? Was that your responsibility?
the internal advocacy was on the team. Like, we'd all talk to our teams about it and say why this is cool and why this is like we can't adhere to a stick timeline or to a particular release when we will get this on. So we were obviously working with high level targets of when we wanted to come to market. But to commit to strict timelines is was hard to do in this project. So that was what a lot of the internal advocacy involved, was to get our leaders to buy in to this schedule of being milestone driven instead of being timeline driven. So defining when we were ready for the internal beta and what data we would need, how many data points to before we said we were ready to launch to real users, things like that. So kind of organizing all of that information, presenting real milestones in terms of what performance metrics we wanted to hit, translating those performance metrics to what it meant for the user experience. And so, like, a 90% accuracy sounds very clinical and dry, but how that translates to the end user is that if they try 3 times and we get it wrong even once, then it's a terrible experience for them. They're not going to come back and use it. So connecting the dots for people even within the org of what milestones you were tracking, how that would lead to a compelling product when we were finally ready to launch, doing the communications around it. We were not held by any comms team, so it was just the team working, me and my science and engineering partners working on detailed FAQs to explain to everyone how we were going to bring this product to market.
I'm kind of curious to know, it was such a big project with so many people involved and different team responsibilities. Did you ever feel as though you became frustrated or it was overwhelming at times? And if you did, how did you deal with that?
That's a great question. I think all PMs face moments of overwhelm and maybe approaching burnout, and just feels like, oh, there's so much to do and I don't have a path to do it with. But there is, I guess, some foundational training or mindset training that that I have to make sure to lean on every time I face a situation like this. So to just embrace the unknown, embrace the ambiguity, and know that there is a logistical series of steps that can be followed to get me to the goal. fine, I might have to adjust the timeline or I might have to adjust scope, but in the end, it's just a series of steps that will get me there. That helps to deal with some of the uncertainty in projects. In terms of overwhelm and just having a lot of volume of work to get done during the day, I think that's what's fun about working in this company and working for Voice, is that all of the testing that I did, playing around with the product, didn't really feel like work. I just felt like I was listening to music or discovering more music or saying cool things and trying out accents. And I'd get my husband to use it to see how it was responding to his accent. So in a lot of ways, it just didn't feel like work at all. It just felt like here's my hobby that I do in the evenings. So uh, that just kept the momentum going. And whenever I'd have one new person testing it out, in the early stages, it was people in the organization, Pandora employees that were testing this product out. And when we did a limited launch in the market, some people posted their thoughts and comments about it on Twitter. And that's really rewarding to read about how much people were enjoying it, what a difference it made to their lives, how much they were like enjoying their commute more now that they could interact with Pandora. So all of those stories and that feedback is such a great motivator for me to just keep going.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that would be that kind of feedback that you didn't even ask for, and you're getting it. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And you mentioned just a few moments ago, you said, to help me with challenges and overwhelm, I had some foundational training that I had to lean on. What was that foundational training? Was that some of your education or was it something else?
That's education and experience.
Okay.
And just a set of tools that are built for myself in my tenure as a product manager is there's always ambiguity to deal with, and a PM is there because they're waiting. Everyone else is waiting on the PM to define a path forward and define frameworks and just to get the job done. So I just leaned on that, and it gets stressful, but knowing that there's always a path to launch, path to success. The only thing that might be changing is it takes us longer to get there. That's a very grounding feeling. So that stress and overwhelm ultimately is temporary.
And you also mentioned a couple of key attributes that you have. One being accept that you might not know where you're going and be comfortable. This next one, the second one, be comfortable with ambiguity. So from your perspective, Ananya, it's really important to have that kind of personality or those kind of traits when you're working on a project like this.
Yeah, I think valuable traits for any PM. And that's what we're here for, that to give shape to the ambiguity, to set a path and a series of logistical steps to get there, and defining these decision-making frameworks. If the outcome is not clear or unpredictable, it's hard to get people to buy in into that. But at that stage, you can just get stakeholders to buy into the decision framework and lay it out clearly and say, okay, these are the risks we're anticipating. Here's some of the things we can do to mitigate that risk. And here's the recommended approach. If things go well, this is where we'll be. If things don't go as planned, here's another alternative solution that gets us there, but with these trade-offs. So just having a plan is the most important, and getting people to buy into that plan is key.
Really important words of wisdom there for any project manager, and also any project manager who's working on a similar kind of project that to the voice mode that you worked on. Yeah. So in terms of the development, we got as far as the size of the teams, and your testing, your research people are testing it with users, Pandora users. Let's focus on that a little bit. I bet that would be really interesting to anyone who's working in conversational design or conversational development. What kind of feedback did you get when you sent out the first, well, let's say the first prototype? And what happened with that feedback? I bet that was a very interesting milestone.
Yeah, we got some very cool learnings all along the way at different stages of product maturity. So in the early days, when we're asking people to try it out for the first time, what was most, I guess, surprising to me was how quickly people are willing to start pushing the envelope on what this product can do and really test the limits of it. So, like I said, using smart speakers or voice assistants to search and play a particular thing is very common, and everyone can do that reasonably well. You tell it a song, or you tell it a song by an artist, it'll play exactly what you want. So we knew that we had to differentiate with the personalization, and that's where Pandora could really leverage its strengths. So we asked people to try out these open-ended queries and stuff like, play something I like, or play something for relaxing, or play something different, where they don't specify exactly what they want. So when people discovered that, they were delighted. They was like, this is great. This really feels conversational and natural. Really feels like this digital assistant that stays in my pocket and knows me really well. But we were really hoping that people will continue to use those ambiguous queries more, and find their moments of joy in that. However, they quickly went to, like, I want it to be like a DJ to me. So at a real party, when the DJ is playing music, he plays 5 tracks, and then he asks me about, oh, what can I play next? Are you still enjoying this? Should I change the track list? So this is very advanced stuff, right? Usually the voice assistants rely on the user to tell them when to engage. So they're not the ones initiating conversations with the user. And to figure out whether it's a good time to interrupt the listening, to ask the user a question, we don't know yet what the right answer to this is, and how we should go about thinking about the constraints of that problem and building a solution for it. What is surprising to me is, like, people just expected to do so much more once they know that it can do the basic stuff well, which is both encouraging because they're like pushing it, but also don't want to disappoint the user by telling them, well, this is going to take some thinking and time to build. But yeah, people are trying some next generation stuff with their voice assistants, and they expect them to perform at that level.
Yeah, I've heard that from other people that I've interviewed for The Future Has Spoken, that there is this expectation that the technology can and will do more than it's able to do at the moment.
Correct.
Yeah. Correct. But in terms of the users who were testing and assisting, did Pandora's team communicate with them directly, like with each user? Yeah.
Yes.
You gave them feedback on all their suggestions, yeah?
Yes. So we had, for different stages for the product maturity, we had different kind of UXR studies planned. At the time of launch, we really wanted people to give us their feedback on what they thought the onboarding process was like, and whether it felt easy and they understood why we were asking for mic permissions on the phone. So the focus was on getting the onboarding experience right and making sure they were satisfied with that. Once we had launched it to a small set of people, we wanted to track those people over time. So we did diary studies. In that involves each user trying the product for a minimum duration every day and then recording their observations. So then you get a real feel for how it plays into day to day. And that's something we really envision for the voice mode, is that it fills in the gap where you have a need of a contextual hands-free environment, and you just tell it what you're in the mood for or what activity you're doing, and would just play music. So unlocking those moments and understanding those journeys were super important to us, which is why we leaned on these diary studies to give us a deeper insight into how people are actually using it. And you're right, it brought more of these users' needs to the forefront, about people expecting voice assistant to be able to recognize different voices, and to be able to understand that there might be multiple people talking, and when to kind of just drop the input versus try to extract something from it. So there's, at technology level too, there is a lot of challenges that we really relied on the UXR study to tell us, because at the end of the day, in the internal employees testing, the team testing, that still leads to usage in very controlled environments and might not give us the right signal, which is why those diary studies are important.
Well, that's a good point that you just made. If you've got one Pandora account and two users, say, husband and wife, or wife and wife, whatever, could Pandora, can it differentiate between the voices on that one account?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Something we're looking to for sure, but also because Pandora is leveraging personalization, and typically it's one account per person. So for sure, my husband and I have different music tastes, and sometimes I play music for my toddler. So all of those are very different listening patterns, and if I use my account to do all of those things, then the personalization signals get a little bit mixed up. So there's definitely a use case to be fulfilled here, in that it should recognize multiple voices, but also how can we recognize voices and serve two individuals on the same account is a hard problem to solve, because the product is designed to have only one account for one user. And for the situations, there's family plans and stuff that you can do, but that would still involve going on a completely different device.
Oh, I see. Well, your example, you have your toddler. Can you have a playlist, something similar to a playlist for your toddler? And could you speak to a Pandora and
definitely
say, play my toddler's playlist, please?
Absolutely. And this is something that we had anticipated and built for right from the beginning. So you can, while you're listening to the song, you're in the moment, you can just say, add this to my playlist, and specify the name of the playlist. We just launched a feature where if you don't specify what playlist you wanted to add it to, we will engage in conversation and say, okay, tell me the name of the playlist, or would you like me to create one? So yes, on the fly, using your voice, you can just tell it to play a particular thing. You can add songs to your playlist, to your collection, which means you essentially subscribe to that song or that podcast. So all of these in-moment controls are also possible using the voice mode.
Sounds really cool. And I'd like to ask you, you mentioned your husband's accent, and Shamla and I have talked about accents in the past. Everyone has their own accent. But of course, if you've moved around a lot, or you're an immigrant to the US and you have, an Asian, a European, accent. How is Pandora able to respond to those accents?
The accents, as I would say, is an industry-wide challenge. How these early learning models were trained was using American accents because it was developed here. But now that we are getting more global usage from these voice technologies, the AIs are also learning how to recognize Indian, Chinese accents. So that's it's lagged, but I would say it's caught up. So even from the time that for voice mode first launched and was out to only a small group of people to now where I don't feel that I have to modify my accent that much to be understood. It's made tremendous progress, and the only way it can work is by getting more people to use it and training the models using a variety of accents. So I don't think we're there yet in terms of understanding all non-American accents. And even in American accents, like the Southern accents, they tend to be not part of the training data set. So voice assistants have some trouble recognizing those as well. So it will catch up. It will take more diverse usage of these voice assistants, but we will get there. Uh, and children's voices is another one, and there is some privacy and ethical concerns with using children's voices to train learning models. However, children tend to be some of the most engaged users of voice technologies. My 4-year-old uses it all the time, and so again, it's getting better. um, Ultimately we're serving the needs for our customers and what they want from the voice assistant. So just developing all of these technologies with very transparent and clear privacy rules that the user is familiar with and knows what is being shared, that's super important. So yeah, accents are still catching up, but I myself seen tremendous improvement. Another challenge is for the music streaming domain. The pronunciations and the names are so tricky sometimes, and at least for me, I think I'm behind the millennial or Generation Z curve. So I am not the first to discover new music and artists a lot of times, and I will read about an artist and I have no idea how to pronounce their name. So even if I have the right accent, I just might not get that name right, and the technology has to be smart enough to understand that I am saying XXS extentation or triple extentation. That was an artist a couple of years ago that was really high on the popularity charts, but nobody knew how to get their name right in our company, at least. So that's an added challenge with music and music related queries. But again, with the usage, with the diversity, we'll be able to get our learning models to catch up.
So just as a short comment there might be a lesson for any aspiring bands or musicians. If you're going to pick a name, don't have one that's difficult to pronounce, eh?
Or pick a name that's difficult to pronounce. Be unique, have your own voice. But yeah, I would say then it's technology's job to understand how your name is going to be said. Another cool one I remember is when uh, Lil Nas came out with Old Town Road, and I think it first went viral as a meme, and people didn't know what the song was called. So it was just called, there was a lyric that was really popular. It was called "I Got Horses in the Back." And I think that's the line that went viral. And again, for a voice assistant, it's important to be able to recognize that people are asking for a lyric, not a song name.
Oh,
So we
yeah.
have lyric
Yeah.
search as well. I blank out at song names all the time. So I just go, oh, play me that song that goes, I got horses in the back.
Hmm.
And then we'll recognize a song and play it for you. So yeah, just like unlocking these use cases and moments that are so suited for voice discovery and doing a really amazing job for the user in terms of being fast, recognizing them, playing the right thing. These are the foundational things that any voice technology has to get right for
Wow.
music.
Yeah. Really good points there, Ananya. Thank you for
Glad to,
those.
yeah. I hope that it helps some of our listeners get
I'm sure they
wisdom.
will. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm curious to know. I understand that the voice mode was launched in the first quarter of 2019, and we're into the last quarter of 2020. So, what has happened in the time that's passed since the launch? Is it being improved? How are you capturing feedback? What's happening with Pandora voice mode?
Yeah. So when we launched in Q1 2019, it was actually a limited launch. So it went out to a very small group of users, and the plan there was to launch and learn. So as I mentioned, we'd already got a really set of deep learnings, rich data set from the internal usage and from our UXR studies. But real world usage is exactly that, and there's no substitute for it. So when we launched, we had a plan to launch to a small group of users first, start getting some real queries, and align our benchmarks to what we were seeing in production. So when in after this 2% launch that we did back in January, we saw an immediate hit to our accuracy rates. So we didn't get as many diverse accents when we were testing internally, and that was not the case anymore when it went out to real users. So we dipped a little bit in accuracy. We saw some uh, app issues with iOS client, sometimes crashing, sometimes failing. So a lot of these learning we only got when we launched in Q1 2019. And there was polishes to be put on the product. There were irons to be wrinkled out before we could introduce a bigger set of users to it. So from January to July, we were just adding more groups of new users as we were learning and refining more and more, and really be confident in our quality benchmarks. And that's why you need a big set of users using it as well. So that the full launch took about 6 to 7 months, um, because you wanted to be cautious in the and launch with real confidence. And after we launched, then it was like, okay, we've solved the biggest use cases of search and play. We have these contextual, ambiguous queries that we can solve really well by playing personalized music. What else do we have to get right? So we continue that repeat use trend. And one of those things was our error handling and graceful failures. That's super important. Again, it was a conscious choice and a product direction to go deep into music and not so broad on personal voice assistant in the voice assistant space, because people use their phones for a lot of stuff like asking for news and what's the weather and what's the directions to the nearest Starbucks. But all of those things are being solved really well by Siri or a Google Assistant. And that's not something that Pandora has to excel at. However, it is still important to manage the user's expectation and maintain that trust and confidence with them. So even if we don't have a good answer to what's the weather, there is a way to just recognize that intent and come back with a response to say, oh, I can't get the weather for you, but um, here's a summer hits playlist, or if if the connectivity was poor and the voice mode was just taking a really long time to respond to the user, tell the user that we're waiting to make a connection, or try their queries in after 5 seconds or so, so that again we maintain that trust and get the user to come back and try us again. Another really important one is when to ask for confirmation. That's a limitation with having a voice only interface. Like if you were to do a search on Google and you got the spelling wrong, Google would ask you, did you mean this? And it's not possible to do that in a voice interface. So knowing when to come back and say, oh, we couldn't find that, try again, versus saying, I think you were looking for such and such, would you like me to go ahead and play that? So just becoming really good at understanding even these non-music intents, or understanding modes of failure and doing more education and conversation around that. Also really like looking at why we were failing when we were, and instead of like going broad and trying to build new features, really focusing in on solving these really deep pain points. So post launch, the focus was on enriching the experience around graceful failures and error handling, and we've also invested a lot of time into thinking about what the future of voice mode looks like. And conversations in general are really interesting because I there's in situations where users don't play for at least a minute or two, we know that they were not happy with the result, or they were happy with the result but they were in the mood for something else. So there's so many other signals that we are not capturing through voice, and it is hard to understand the user's intent. So, and like using all of the contextual signals on the phone available to us and interpreting the user's intent, and then understanding that they might be frustrated or they're happy or they're looking for something else, and playing something according to that. This is again a hard problem to solve and involves research and hypothesis and a lot of testing, which is what I'm focusing on right now. Also trying to think of what cool features possibly exist only on voice, or what these use cases are that are not suited to a type and swipe interface. And one of those things is just you want to listen to a certain type of music, but you don't know exactly what you want. So you say things like, oh, I want 90s rock songs with female vocals, which is a specific ask. And I can do that on my phone right now as a premium user of Pandora. I can say the characteristics of the type of music I want to listen to, but not really specify a playlist or a station or a song. And voice mode will recognize what I want to listen to and generate a playlist for me on the fly. So maintaining the balance between innovative, cool features suited to voice, while really still strengthening the foundational experiences and making it so effortless and so easy to use that that's the first thing people do when they launch Pandora, instead of browsing around or searching in the search box. They just use their voice to get the music playing.
Wow. So it sounds as though as much work has been done post-release as was done during the development phase. That's an incredible amount of work for you and your team, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot of
resolving errors and
errors like disambiguation of queries, understanding when to engage in conversation, like to what extent we should go outside, just play music intents and enable navigation within the app. So these are all problems we're thinking about. And this is a long-term strategy. Like voice is here to stay, and we've made the investment. We made the commitment to invest in it, and there's just so much more potential, even outside of the phone, in cars, in connected devices, that we can keep doing more and more to delight our customers. And having a native voice experience is one way, but this can grow and expand so much more in the next few years. So the time to think about the problems and where we want to invest is right now. And definitely the fact that we have this out in the market and we have some real usage and feedback around it helps to strengthen that case of building a long-term voice strategy.
That sounds great. And before we end our interview, I'd like to ask you, what would your keywords of advice be to a product manager working on something similar? And you've already shared a lot of words of wisdom and advice for people just through your own experience. Is there anything else that you would like to say? Anyone listening who's embarking on a really big, exciting project like yours?
For voice, I would say especially focus on real users and real use cases, and assume that there's just multiple ways to ask for the same thing. So what that means is, if for a music streaming app that has a voice assistant, volume control seems like a no-brainer, but anticipating the user's need of how they will ask to control the volume is so many. So we have to build for all of those use cases. And the usage and learning from the user has to be organic. You can't force the user to behave in a certain way or train them to make certain types of commands in a way. It happens naturally, but the system has to be robust enough to understand all of that. Another thing I would say is, for voices, context is so important. And that really helps uncover these use cases where voice can do so much more than a traditional interface. So think about how the user is using it in their day-to-day life, where they might not already be using a voice technology, but there's potential for them to do so, and how your product might play into those moments. And my third piece of advice would be, make sure that the voice experience for your product or brand feels like a part of the whole. It has to be saying the same brand story, the same brand values, everything around that experience has to be aligned with the overall company goals and mission. And that direction and mission should dictate even the smallest aspects of the user experience.
Such incredible pieces of advice there based on your experience. Touching on the different ways that people might ask for something simple like volume, and a really strong focus on the user. And someone else that I interviewed recently for this series, it was Kerry Roberts, also made the point that you've just made, that whatever the interface is, it has to fit in with the brand. It can't be, so different or sound different, or, and respond in a way that people think, that's not how Pandora's brand would respond. That sounds unfamiliar to me.
Yeah.
In terms of your reading materials or videos, and even your own writings, Ananya, is there anything that you'd like to share with listeners that will help them along their journey in their work?
Google has some really good design principles around managing conversations, and I think that's good reading material.
Is that available online?
That is available online. Actually, this is a great question, and I have to say that apart from a couple of publications, nothing is coming to mind right now.
That's absolutely fine. What we can do is touch base later.
Yeah, I can send a list of.
We'll put them in the show notes. Yeah.
Materials. Yep.
And my last question, Ananya, is I'm wondering what's next for Pandora's voice mode, for example, in 2021, or is it top secret company information?
I can tell you that we're still working really hard to improve product qualities, and these will be incremental in nature and might not be super noticeable for everyone, but a lot of foundational work to make sure that it works fast, it's reliable, and we are providing a delightful experience every time. So efforts focused on product quality itself, but also working on these really innovative use cases for voice, especially, that users will be so thrilled with when they unlock the full potential of Pandora's catalog through their voice. So not just music, but also spoken word, and all of the new content that comes in the Pandora experience will be discoverable through voice. And we're working on new ways and new opportunities to get that into the users' lives really seamlessly.
Wow.
So a lot more exciting things coming.
Yeah, definitely. So good times ahead for Pandora subscribers in the US. That sounds great. Well, it's been delightful speaking with you today, and such an enormous amount of sharing and great value for anyone who's working in your industry. It's been a real pleasure, and I've got no doubt we'll get some great feedback on this episode.
Thank you, Sheila. I love talking about voice mode and the voice space. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening today. Remember, you can find all the information on how to become a certified voice interaction designer, along with show notes and more, at our website, digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. We encourage your feedback and questions, so be sure to get in touch by using the contact page at the Digital Assistant Academy's website. We'll include the link in the show notes. In our next episode, Hans van Dam explores how conversational designers can write for listenability.